We have excellent lawyers, excellent. Have you noticed that lots of law firms have been signing up with Trump? $100 million, another $100 million for damages that they've done. What the hell? They give me a lot of money considering they've done nothing wrong. And we'll use some of those people, some of those great firms. They are great firms, too. They just had a bad moment. But we're going to use some of those firms to work with you on your leasing and your other things, and they'll do a great job. I think they're going to do a fantastic job.
Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York. It is a classic children's story. If you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want some milk to go with it. And when it comes to Donald Trump and law firms, if you give him even just a little tiny inch of appeasement, he's never going to stop there, ever. That is the situation right now with several of the world's most prominent law firms who willingly walked into the Oval Office and made deals with Donald Trump in recent weeks. Each one of those firms proactively agreeing to fork over millions of dollars in pro bono work in order to evade punishment in the form of an executive order against their firms. There is brand new reporting in the New York Times today that finds this, quote, Trump, it turns out, has a far more expansive view of what those firms can be called on to do. Over the last week, Trump has suggested that the firms will be drafted into helping him negotiate trade deals. He has mused about having them help with his goal of reviving the coal industry. And he has hinted that he sees the promises of nearly $1 billion in pro bono legal services that he has extracted from the elite law firms, including Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison, Skadden, Arps, Slate, Meagher, and Flom, and Wilkie, Farr, and Gallagher as a legal war chest to be used as he, Donald Trump, wishes, end quote. So predictable. You're tempted to laugh, right? These firms thought they were avoiding future conflict through appeasement. When in the history of humans has that ever been the case? They thought that by making Trump happy on the front end, they could go about their business on the back end forever. But as the Times reports out today, quote, the emerging gap between what the firms initially thought they agreed to and what Trump says they can be used for shows how the deals did little to insulate them from his whims. Further demands on the firms from Trump could raise the potential for conflicts with paying clients and could further fuel internal dissension, end quote. Meanwhile, there are firms that did not take this route, that chose not to cave to Trump's demands. Wilmer Hale, Jenner and Block, and Perkins Coie, when they fought against the Trump administration's revenge orders. Judges have all ruled in their favor, temporarily pausing the executive orders the administration placed on those firms. And yesterday, there was another judge ruled in favor of the firms standing up to Trump and fighting the executive orders. Separate reporting in the Times finds this, quote, a federal judge on Tuesday blocked President Trump from punishing the law firm Sussman Godfrey, calling the retribution campaign he has waged from the White House against the nation's top firms, quote, a shocking abuse of power. Donald Trump's escalating war on law firms is where we begin the hour with New York Times investigative reporter, MSNBC national security contributor Mike Schmidt, whose byline is on that first piece of Times reporting we read from. Also joining us is voting rights attorney, founder of Democracy Docket, our friend Mark Elias, and former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the Department of Justice, now an MSNBC legal analyst, Mary McCord is here. Mike, take us through what you and your colleagues are reporting.
So if you're following the law firm story like we are, at the beginning of last week, it looked like it might be sort of petering out. There were more deals that were happening. They were happening with firms that... Petering
out on which end? Well, more EOs or more deals?
It just seemed like the momentum of the story was sort of slowing down. There were more deals that were happening. They were happening with firms, some firms that I had never heard about. We weren't, it looked like it was going to continue, but sort of any jarring developments in the story didn't seem like they were afoot. But what happens by the middle of last week is that comment after comment Trump is making, and then that Peter Navarro made, shows that the White House's understanding of the deals is far more expansive than what the firms thought they were getting themselves into. Because if you go back and you look at how the firms got themselves into this situation, how does someone like Brad Karp, the head of Paul Weiss, get himself to make this deal? They believe that they're just committing to doing pro bono legal work on issues that they're already working on. It's not a big deal. They're not capitulating to Trump because what they're doing in their own minds is just, you know, we already do stuff for Veterans Affairs. We already do stuff to fight anti-Semitism. So committing this money to Trump to do this pro bono legal work, we're not really giving anything up. This is actually a good deal for us. But what you start to see in Trump's comments last week, and then which backed up by our reporting about what's going on inside the White House, is that they think that this pro bono legal work can be used in a lot of different ways. And in ways to potentially help Trump himself, in ways to go out and do tariff negotiations. And what happens is that this is what could really happen is that, you know, Boris Epstein or someone in the White House or Trump himself could go to the firms and say, hey, guys, we want you to do this work. And that would put the firms in an even more difficult position. They thought that they got themselves out of Dodge by making these deals, by going ahead and committing this amount of money and having Trump put out these Truth Social posts and not having to be hit with these executive orders. But they could now find themselves in a position of having to say no to Trump. And obviously, if they say no to Trump, they could be hit with another executive order again and find themselves back at square one.
Mark Elias, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really put my finger on what would make a good or bad lawyer. But I would think that central to a good lawyer would be a student of history. And what lawyer looks at what case history in the area of appeasement and thinks that this is going to be good lawyering?
I mean, if the version of what the law firms are telling the New York Times is correct, then every client should fire them. I mean, they are literally the most incompetent lawyers in America, because it isn't possible that all of these high-priced millionaire lawyers in Washington, D.C. thought that if they made a deal with Donald Trump, that Donald Trump was effectively getting nothing. They were getting everything, and none of this would come back to bite them. I mean, that's honestly what they're trying to sell people. It's what they tried to sell their associates. It's what they tried to sell their partners. And honestly, it was a bunch of nonsense. And I have to think, for their own self-worth and for their own dignity, that they didn't actually believe that. I mean, I have to believe that they are actually smarter than that, and that what they were doing is like in the scene in The Godfather, where the Godfather says, someday, and that day will never come, I'll call upon you to do a service for me. And they were just hoping the day would never come. But they knew that if the day came that the Godfather said, I need a service for you, they're going to do the service. So let's just start with this. The law firms are never standing up to Donald Trump. The law firms that ceded the last shred of their dignity, had their backbones extracted from them and handed them over to Boris Epstein, like those law firms are fully, wholly owned by Donald Trump. And if Donald Trump says, go represent the coal industry, they'll say yes. If they say, go represent us in these trade deals, they'll hem and they'll haw, but they'll say yes. They've got no leverage at this point. They have sold their last piece of their soul to Donald Trump in the hope that he never comes and asks them for anything. But when he does, as he always does, because Donald Trump won't ask for something just because he needs a favor. He asks for it because it humiliates the person he demands it from. And he's going to humiliate each and every one of these law firms by demanding they do something that is odious to them. And they will say, yes, sir, with tears in their eyes.